Hi, this is James Tanner, and this is Exploring Genealogy Series number 2. I will be talking about working with sources on Ancestry.com. Most genealogists would be familiar with the program of Ancestry.com. Ancestry.com is one of the most popular and well-known of the large online genealogical database programs. Of course, it's a subscription-only program, but there are millions of users. One of the basic issues with genealogical research is substantiating conclusions made about individuals and their families through providing records that refer to the individuals. So the most important thing that we can do as genealogists in creating an accurate family tree is to substantiate each and every one of our conclusions with a reference to a record. We would call this now, just for the purposes of understanding the terminology that I'm using here, a record is some physical representation of what happened in an event during an ancestor's life. Okay, the simplest way to think of that for most people is to think of birth and death records in this form of government birth certificates and death certificates. These are created by government entities to commemorate or to record the death or birth of an individual. They become permanent records in the sense that they are maintained by the government and in many cases made available to genealogical researchers, either online or through obtaining actual physical copies of the documents. Okay, so these records are then made available. As once they're available, then a genealogist who wishes to find out information about a family or individual can look at this type of record and see exactly what information is available. I'm here on Ancestry, and I'm going to show a record that comes up as a suggested record from Ancestry for someone in my family. In this case, it turns out to be a marriage record for Joseph DeFries and Marianne Bryan. If this were something that I did not know, then I would now have a physical a virtual representation of a physical record, which I could then use to enter information about these two individuals, and perhaps more information because of the nature of this particular record than I may have known previously. And so these records become the basis for extending family lines and for doing research. So if you are doing family history, if you're becoming involved in genealogy or family history either as a beginner or as a person who has had some extensive research experience in the area of family history, then I would suggest that we focus, today I'm going to focus on the records that we find on Ancestry.com. Now, what we have here is a program with millions of records. If I go up to the search tab in Ancestry and I go to their card catalog, I can see that they have 32,661 record collections, and many of these collections have hundreds of thousands and even millions of records on a whole variety of places around the world. In this case, and at this point, the newer records in this one are mostly from Europe. Some of them from New York, some of them from France, Germany, all sorts of places that we may have your ancestors may have lived. And the idea here is that we use these records that have been collected to create a source. We refer to it as a source that cites the record and the information contained in the record, and then we attach that information to an individual in our family tree. So now I'm going to go to my family tree here on Ancestry, and we'll have a look at some of the individuals here. I'm going to choose an individual somewhat at random and look at what's here from Ancestry.com. Now, one of the movements and benefits that has happened over the past few years is that these large online genealogy programs such as Ancestry.com and FamilySearch.org and MyHeritage.com and FindMyPast.com and other programs are beginning to somewhat automate the process of finding and attaching records. And so in this particular episode, what I wanted to do was to illustrate and explore the process of finding records on Ancestry and then attaching those records to an individual and then evaluating the content of those records. So in this case, I've picked up an individual here named William Hines Godfrey, who was born in 1800 and died in 1864, and was from England. And here on this screen, it looks to me like I have already added a number of records. The 1841 English census, 51 English census, England's and Wales death record from a death index, national probate calendar, will, nonconformist parochial register, England select births, and England select marriages. Obviously, if you are just beginning your process of investigating your family, these records may not be familiar. If you have been doing research for some time, you'll recognize all of these records, particularly if you've done research in England. So if we were to look at any one of these records, we simply have to click and view the record, and then we have either access to the original record or an index, which would be a compilation of the names and information that's contained in the record. So here on Ancestry, when we do that, we see an extraction of information that's contained in the record, and it is obviously a record of the person that I am interested in here. And also there's a link to the original 1841 census record, and we can look at that census record and zoom in and find our family and get additional information if there is information contained in the record which has not been extracted. So we have here the family of William Godfrey and Rebecca and the children listed. And there's also there are also at least one other individual person that may be listed and is living with that family. Sometimes these other individuals are the parents of the primary residents. In this particular year, 1841 at the English census, there's not as much information as is gathered in subsequent census years. If we were now return to our, let's go back to our individual here. So So far with this person, I've accumulated a number of records. But I look up here above and I see that there are even more records which Ancestry has suggested may be applicable to my individual. And as I look at those records, I can then determine whether or not they are or are not records that I would be interested in. Now, these records fall into different categories. If we scroll down through the list of the records, we'll see lots of different things. These are all record hints for the same individual. So we assume that there's a William Godfrey, and we have a spouse named Rebecca Bailey, and then another spouse down here named Mary Ann Godfrey. So we may need to go back to our original record to see whether or not this is the person that we're interested in, and whether or not that he actually had two wives. Well, if we go back over here to our list on the right-hand side, we see that he does have two spouses listed, Rebecca Bailey, who died in 1845, and Mary Ann Scott, who died in 1889. And so there were, in fact, two marriages, at least that's the records that have been accumulated so far. Now, the questions each time we look at this, and the critical question that we ask ourselves when we look at all of this information that's been provided to us, is exactly how much of this information are we going to actually need or use to advance our person. In other words, there's going to be some records listed here that we may or may not wish to have. For example, this next record right here is merely a representation that says third great-grandfather, and I'm not sure if William Hines Godfrey off the top of my head is my third great-grandfather, but I certainly don't care if I have that particular document, right? So I can have, one of the options is that I can ignore that document. And then if we look up here, we'll see we have what are called ancestry member trees. These are other people on the program who have information and are most likely my relatives, cousins, and other relationships that have records and have accumulated records on the Ancestry program. Okay, so now I'm going to am I going to go look at all of these member family trees? If I review them, I will see that there are a fairly large number of them. I guess in this case, 19 ancestry member trees that have some reference to William Hines Godfrey. At this point, and because I already have some records about William Hines Godfrey, I am not going to be awfully interested in all of these family trees because they will have accumulated some of or all of the same sources that I have. Although here's one with 23 sources, and so there has been some considerable amount of work done on this particular family. In the case that these records are different than the ones that I have already accumulated, this is one way of approaching the records and obtaining additional sources for each of the individuals that I have in my family tree. However, for the moment, I'm going to cancel out of this section and look at some of the others. In this case, there's one that says that this is William Hines Godfrey christening record, and it's contained in a member photo. And in this case, we see that it is a record of William Hines Godfrey. and I would like to save that to my tree, and there's an option right here that says Save to Tree, and I can find the person here that I'm going to attach it to, and if I start typing that, I'll get a list, and then basically it says that I have now saved this document to my family tree, and I now have an additional document for William Hines Godfrey. And here adds it to some other documents that are contained in the gallery. Now, if I go back to my facts, I still have 11 record hints, and I could continue to process those record hints. The other category of records that are there include a marriage record between Godfrey and Bailey. This is also a member photo. As I process these records, I would be adding all of these pertinent records either to my gallery or to my as sources attached to my individual to the individual that I'm working with on my particular family tree. Here's another marriage banns record down. A marriage and marriage banns record, and if I review that particular record, this one comes directly from a source, record source on Ancestry. I can view the record initially and review exactly what it says, and as I look at this and zoom in, I will see that it is, have to find the right person first of all. And see where it comes up. So here is father's name, William Godfrey. And here's William Hines Godfrey, Mary Ann Scott. Okay, so this marriage record here is actually a record of the marriage, the wedding ceremony in the parish church, and it tells us the parish and the county, and it tells us the names of the fathers, and it's very valuable information, and we would want to add that. And the question up here on from Ancestry is this: does this Mary Scott reflect a match to a person in your tree? And the answer is yes. Now, here's the problem that occurs with Ancestry, and that is that Mary Ann Scott is the primary person in that record, but Ancestry has lined her up with her husband, William Hines Godfrey, which is not the case of the right person. So this isn't the person, and we've got to rearrange or get this record so that it attaches to the right person. We don't want to attach this Mary Ann Scott record and with information to William Hines Godfrey. He didn't marry himself, and so this isn't his record. So what we're going to do is cancel that record. But we're going to keep that in the back of our mind that we have that record available. One of the options I could have done would be to have copied the actual record or downloaded and then used that to put that back into the program as an attachment in the gallery, which is what other people have done. But in this case, I'm going to go look for that record, and my assumption is that William Hines Godfrey has been indexed in that record too, and we will be able to find him with that record. So we'll look again, and we'll see what we have under William Hines Godfrey. In this case, we have the Godfrey Bailey marriage, and we have Godfrey Scott marriage. And someone else has attached that same record to the gallery. So I haven't, and I already have that linked. So I already had that record, and did not need to. Uh, I did not need to attach another copy of that record to my person. So one of the things that you do is you go through and evaluate these records and look at them to see whether or not they actually pertain to your individual. Is that it would is to look carefully at each of the records and check to see whether that information is pertinent. So we're going to sit here for a second while the computer goes through its process. Now, as we look at the records further, we see that there's many other records here that need to be evaluated and either attached or not attached to this individual. There may, in fact, be people who are these records which are not the right or correct records, and therefore they need to be ignored. And there are other records here that I may want to attach. Now, if we go back to William Hines Godfrey, we still have all those hints, and I'm not going to spend the entire time here just attaching record hints. But there's one more place that's important to check for additional records to a family, and that is to look under the search tab. When you search for an individual, what happens is that Ancestry will show you the records that you've already attached, and then will give you your primary person and also give you a list of other records. Now you'll see that some of these records are the same as the ones that were found as record hints, but not all. It's very, very possible here that there are additional records which have not yet been found as record hints, including that one record that we just looked at as a record hint for Mary Ann Scott, and which now could be attached to William Hines Godfrey. In addition to that, we have some records that we have already attached. And if I click on a record that I know is a record of my particular person, and for example here, William Hines Godfrey, and look at this record, an interesting thing's going to happen here. Over on the right-hand side, we're going to find a long list of suggested records for William Godfrey, Mary Ann Scott, and others. And this list of records is considerably more valuable than any other search that we might do. These suggested records appear to be more accurate and more pertinent in most cases than they would be if you were just looking for the individual over and over again. So we have a considerable number of records in this case to go through, and some of which may or may not be the right person. I go down through these records and we see there's another record out here for William Godfrey from Surrey. That might not be the right person because of the place, and we have to evaluate carefully which records are the ones that pertain to our family. Okay, so what we've done here is kind of give you an overview of the process. I can summarize the process. First of all, we use the program to add records to our family and substantiate information about the individuals that we have in our family tree, and also use the information from these records to add additional individuals and families. But the question here is always, does this record pertain to my person? Is it correct? Does it accurately represent the person that I'm finding? Even though Ancestry's search engines are extremely efficient and do a good job of filtering out false positives or people who are not really the right person. It's still up to us as individual users to make that determination and decide whether or not a person is or is not a part of our family. So this kind of wraps up the initial idea here that I wanted to present, and I hope that you are able to continue to progress in your genealogical research, and this will end another Exploring Genealogy series, and I would very much like to thank all of you for watching, and we'll see you next time.